Um, so we're appearing to you as floating heads, I think, right now. Uh, so my name is Vignesh Senguttuvan.
And I'm David Poling.
And we, this semester, have been working on a project for our computer science capstone that was presented to us by Ravi called Project SageRx. And we had a third member named Paul, but unfortunately he was having technical issues, so he couldn't make it today. But um, essentially, one of the main points of this project was to take the historical drug information that is found on RxNorm. You can probably move on to the next slide. I should have mentioned that. On the NLM hosted database RxNorm and trying to convert it into a more accessible and user-friendly form. So RxNorm, just a little background on it. It's a valuable resource that offers the standard naming conventions for drugs, which enables semantic interoperability across various drug vocabularies. So it essentially connects the different ways pharmacists or physicians may refer to different drugs and the various official classifications for them. And this is an invaluable tool because it can aid in a physician's clinical decision making. And so that's one of the main reasons why RxNorm is such a valuable resource. But one of the downsides of the website is that it isn't really maintained in a very optimal format. And the way that the format is presented is kind of sprawling and hard to parse through. And so, so me and David, coming from a more data science background, one of the main, I guess, priorities was to try and take the column and table structure of the historical drug information on RxNorm and to make it more primed for any future downstream data analysis. And so that was one of the main, I guess, motivations behind our project, SageRx, was to take the information and put it in a more legible format for future downstream data scientists to work with. And I guess lastly, it's notable to mention that RxNorm does offer an API, and an API is just a method which allows programmers, independent programmers, to access information from the internet per se. But the API that is offered by RxNorm is very unintuitive, and the documentation isn't very helpful either. So another one of the main motivations behind SageRx is to maybe even come up with an API that can make data analysis using RxNorm information more easy to work with. So you can go on to the next slide.
Okay, so when we joined this project, the status of the team was that they had code that was able to pull the latest release of RxNorm, and they were able to deal with that data. But there are also archive data dating back over 15 years, and this includes monthly releases. So 15 years worth of data, 12 releases per year. That's a minimum of 180 releases, and these are big data sets. They contain thousands and thousands of different drug information. So our idea was, instead of having to parse through each of these individually to find specific data, we would try to merge all the historical data into a centralized database. This would make it much easier to query for specific data, but there were issues with this approach. So obviously, when we're dealing with this much data, you have the simple time and storage constraints. So this is too much data for us to feasibly store, and it's just not the most efficient way. One thing to note is that between each release, the drugs aren't being totally renewed, or not everything is changing between release. Most of it stays the same. So we have a lot of redundant data. We don't need to store all these entries twice. And occasionally the primary key, or the identifier that lets us say this column or this row corresponds to this drug, that occasionally changes, which makes it difficult to merge data. All right, we could move on to the next slide, please. All right, so with our progress and our future work, so far we've written code to automate the download and the merging of two separate releases. So we have an app on our computer. When we give it a command, it downloads that data from the RxNorm website. It parses it into a table, and then it merges those two tables into one. And so that's the first step. And we've also spent a lot of time strategizing about how to merge these, how to effectively track changes in drug data over time. And that leads into our future work. So this will likely be picked up by the other members of the SageRx team and then possibly future capstone students. But they may include expanding this workflow to include all the data sets, and then also possibly attaching an API to increase user functionality and achieve that functionality that we hope the stock RxNorm website would have. That's all we have. So thank you very much for your time.
So that's a round of applause on our side. Thank you, David and Vignesh. And I think I also saw on our call Joey Legrand, who served mainly as our primary mentor, also our founder of CodeRx. For anyone interested in the world of anything digital in pharmacy, CodeRx is a community of pharmacists who code. Fantastic Slack channel, coderx.io is the website for more. I wanted to pause to ask our audience, either here or, of course, on Zoom, questions you might have for our computer science capstone team. Or, Joey, if you're able to join and share, if you'd have any questions or feedback for the team, welcome to pause here to have you share it. Questions from our audience? I have one up front here.
Yeah, who would be like the main population for this? Like for doing all this work to condense it, get it into sort of manageable, easier access. Who do you see as using it the most? Is it physicians? Is it other pharmacists? More like research based?
So the question I'll repeat back for our team with David and Vignesh. The question being, let me know if I get it right, who would be the audience? Who would be the users of the output for the work that you all have proposed? Was it physicians, pharmacists, researchers, somebody else? Did I capture that correctly? Thumbs up on our side. David, Vignesh, who would be the end user? What do you imagine a target to look like?
I guess trying to give a better answer than just yes. Ideally, it'll be helpful for everyone. So obviously we started the CodeRx team as, pharmacists who are interested in computer science and data science. So that's kind of the first goal. And so a lot of the ideas of the end goal we have in mind are from a pharmacist sort of point of view about what would be most helpful. But the idea is once you have this data that's not behind this kind of obfuscation, where you have to figure out authentication and how to interpret all these, horribly named attributes. So once it's more intuitive, then you can really, really broaden out that user base of who could use that data. You can have data analysts that can actually just take this data, and once it's more readable, they can do a lot more interesting things with it. Whether it's a pharmacist, a physician, a nurse, really whoever wants to know about how kind of drug releases have changed over time. So it's kind of, the limits are, no limits.
Got the thank you back from the audience. I'll pause for any quick round of comments from the audience.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So thank you for the presentation, David and Vignesh. I guess as a med student who also codes, I'm curious what your experience was as a pharmacy student who codes, and whether you think there's some advantage to having both skill sets in the same brain, or if you think the issue is that we're not connecting enough across fields, and you'd rather tell a comp sci major to code this for you. As you're trying to bring this idea to life, what do you think would be the best way to do that?
There's a lot of good information with that I'll try to repeat. And next time I'll just hand off to my dog. Great. Well, and I'll share too as they share back. So Anna's question, as a med student who codes, coming back to our team, what's it like trying to code for something that's very clinically oriented? I add that nuance because they're a computer science team without a direct clinical connection.
Interesting.
So if it's all right, and I'll reframe. Back to the team, what was it like trying to code for something very clinical without that experience of the clinical background? And how would that have helped, or how could you have looped in clinicians into a team if that would have been valuable?
Yeah, that's good enough.
I guess I would say that it is one of those things where more background knowledge on the pharmaceutical side of things could definitely help, at least with like envisioning what the end goal would look like, right? Because like as computer scientists, or like data scientists, we are, I guess, more so trained to like just kind of fulfill certain tasks within like a given context, but like that contextual information isn't necessarily taught to us. So like knowing that would definitely, I think, help bridge the gap between like the mentors on our team who had to like maybe like kind of give us like a deep dive of like what exactly are we like doing with this information, what kind of information is stored, how do we want to like store it. And like I figure like having that background would really help in tandem to having like skill and experience with computer science and coding. But I do think that having a multitude of backgrounds was also helpful because there were, I guess, certain considerations to be made when we were discussing like stuff like the table structure and like how do we want to like automate the download process, like in terms of like efficiency and like memory storage, which probably like if you were someone who like does coding even in like a different field, you probably would kind of have an idea of, but like having someone who is like actively thinking about that, like alongside someone else who's thinking about like what the organization of the final product should be to like optimize usage by like potential users is very helpful. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I guess just to add a bit, first of all, great question. Thank you very much for asking. None of us come from none of us have a pharmacy background. Math and computer science. The extent to which math has helped was probably doing that 12 times 15 on the previous slide. But the computer science, obviously very helpful. And I would really recommend talking to Ravi, checking out the CodeRx team is really doing a lot of cool things and just passing around cool articles about how to jump into this stuff because it can be intimidating to figure out, what should I be capable of as, a med student or a pharm student. But there's a really great community that can kind of help you figure that out and kind of, see what you could do with that information.
Well, thank you all for your questions. A thank you from the audience to our presenters as well for your answers. And before we move on to our next presenter, I just wanted to double check with our extended mentor, Joey. Any comments or feedback for our team before we continue on? Cool. Well, another round of applause for our virtual team. And as we have our next presenter joining us, I will give 2 fake points, extra credit, why not? Semester's over. 2 fake extra credit points if anyone can name where David was presenting from. Can anyone pick up? I think it's a pit building. Any guesses?
Osvar.
David, do you happen to be in Posvar?
I am indeed in Posvar.
2 points. I heard Benjamin first, but he's also closest to me. So always